All right, we're back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about the ESPN Fantasy Football library that I've just created. So I've made many videos on ESPN, pulling ESPN Fantasy Football data, your own league's data. But I figured I'd make another one since I made some significant updates to this library. I actually also made it available so that anyone in the world can install this right through the terminal. So I'm going to make this video step by step as if you're not very experienced with Python, and or you just want a quick way to grab your data automatically, and then you can pull it out and take it to Excel or even to Power BI. I've talked to some people that use it that way, but it's going to be slow. It's going to be step by step, and I'm going to show you how to grab your fantasy leagues, fantasy football data. So let's get started. First thing you want to do is open a terminal. If you are on Windows, it's probably command prompt. So you just type in pip install ESPN Fantasy Football. I'm not going to hit enter because I already have it installed, but you would just run this. It'll install the library on your computer, and then you'll be able to use all of the code that I've written just locally for yourself. So after that, we're going to open up a code interpreter. In this case, I'm using VS Code, but you can use anything. You could use Jupyter Lab or Google Colab or something like that. So let's make a new file. We'll just call this example video.ipynb. So what an ipynb file is a Python notebook. And the benefit of using a notebook is you can split your code into chunks. You can, do this for testing purposes, or a lot of times people will write an entire report in a notebook like this. So you can see the code step by step and maybe put some visualizations in there and stuff like that. So we'll start by importing our dependencies. First, we're going to import pandas as PD. Pandas is like a very standard data science Python library. What it does is it separates it creates objects called data frames that your data goes into, which you can think of as a table or like an Excel spreadsheet, sort of, but you can use it programmatically. So next, we're going to import the library we just downloaded called ESPN Fantasy Football. And I'm just going to abbreviate it as ESPN in this case. So let's run this. My computer's kind of slow today, so it might take a second. All right. Next, what are we going to do next? The main object, the main advantage that this ESPN Fantasy Football library offers is the Fantasy League class. So we're going to create a new variable called League, and we're going to use ESPN.Fantasy League. And in this case, it takes 4 parameters. So the first one is League ID. You can see GitHub Copilot's already assuming what I'm writing here. So the way you find the league ID is you go anywhere in your fantasy league. It could be the home page, it could be your roster, and take a look at the URL. And in here you'll see league ID equals, this is my number, so I'm going to grab this. So that's how you find your league ID, pretty easy. We've got 3 more parameters to put in. So the next we're going to grab the year. In this case, I'm just going to use 2020. And the last 2 things we want, not username and password, are SWID. So SWID and ESPN underscore S2. So I've left this blank right now, but what these things are something called cookies. So a cookie, I think everybody's probably heard the term, is a piece of data that a website will store in your browser that contains information about you. So in this case, the SWID and ESPN to S2 are cookies that allow ESPN to know that you're allowed to be logged into the league that you're looking at. So I'll show you how to grab these. It's pretty easy. So again, anywhere on your Fantasy League's website, you're going to right click and hit Inspect Element. And this will work. I'm using Safari. This will work for Chrome or any other browser that you might want to use. So look for something called the Storage tab. And then under Cookies, we're looking for ESPN.com. So I'm not going to show you my values, but what you're going to want to do is grab those cookie values that I mentioned, the ESPN S2 and the SWID, and I'll show you what to do with them once you grab them. We'll create a new file here called, let's call it ESPN secrets.py. So we'll create two variables, SWID and ESPN underscore S2. So these are both going to be strings. Paste them in here. So I'm going to pause the video here, but go ahead, take those cookies, post them into here, and I'll show you what to do with them afterwards. All right, so I put my two values into the ESPN secrets.py file. One thing we need to do is we got to import that file now. So we're going to import ESPN secrets, and we have to restart the kernel so that it knows that the file's there. So just gonna hit this restart button. It'll restart everything. This kind of wipes any local variables that have stored on your kernel and restarts everything. So let's run this again, and it'll bring in ESPN secrets now. So now we're going to put, for the SWID value, we'll put ESPN secrets.swid, and the same thing over here, ESPN secrets.ESPN-S2. So when I run this, it takes a couple seconds. What it does is, oops, typo there. What it does is it creates a request to the URL that we specified, and the way it finds your URL is through this league ID. It's all behind the scenes, so it's going to grab the data, and when we do this function here, on our league variable, let's assign it to another variable. So our data equals league dot get league data. So when we run this, it'll pull the data from that website, our ESPN Fantasy Football League, and it'll deposit the data into the data variable. So it takes a while because it's making multiple requests, multiple GET requests to the API. Anyway, now if we print out the data, we can see here's a list of players. You can see the columns here. So it pulls by default every single week of data. Optionally, in this get league data, you could specify a week variable if you just wanted to grab 1 week's worth of data, a certain week's worth of data, or even a list of weeks. So we can see we got player name here, player actual score, player projected score, fantasy team number, the team name, and the player name. So we can also see what slot the player was played in, which is pretty helpful. But yeah, so that's pretty quick way. It only took like 4 or 5 lines of code to grab our entire league's year's worth of data. So you can do with this what you wanted. If anybody has any questions or concerns, just let me know. I can help you out. Also, if anybody has requests of columns they'd like to see or new functions they'd like to see, perhaps if you want to see your league standings, that's something I can work on. And to be clear, this is your fantasy league's data. So this is your Derrick Henry scored 16.1 points in my league in week 1 of 2020. So it's my league specific scoring, including the projected score, which I think is pretty helpful. One more thing we can do here, we can also grab the matchup data. So get matchup data. And again, you can specify a specific week, or you can just run it wide open and it'll give you the whole year. So when I run this, it'll print out, it takes a couple seconds, but it'll print out the matchups in my league along with the scores and whether or not it was a playoff game. So you can see here, these are the teams. You can see the team 1 score, team 2 score. It's just a quick way of getting this data. If you have a league that's been going on for years and you wanted to do some analytics on it, it's a lot easier doing this than it is like manually copying everything into an Excel sheet. So again, if you guys like this video, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.